morning when Caitlin Clark was taken out of the game by Stephanie White. And shout out, hold on, let me get this pulled up for y'all real quick. Let me blow this up. Shout out to IDX Texas, my dog. He stated, I'm just going to say this and let it play out. If she leads this team this season or ever, the Fever will celebrate like they just...
Watch that clip carefully. Not the play, not the score, not the crowd. Watch her. Caitlin Clark gets subbed out, walks to the bench, and doesn't even glance in Stephanie White's direction. No acknowledgement, no eye contact, no reaction at all. She sits down, crosses her arms, and stares straight ahead like the coach doesn't exist. That's not a player having a bad night. That's not someone blowing off steam after a tough quarter. That is a superstar who is mentally disconnected from her coaching staff, and the footage is so damning that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Something is seriously broken inside the Indiana Fever organization, and it's been building for a long time. Today, we're going to break down exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what it could mean for the future of women's basketball as we know it. Because this isn't just about minutes or rotations or one press conference comment. This is about whether one of the most talented players to ever pick up a basketball is being systematically held back by the very organization that's supposed to be lifting her up. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to see the full picture, and it's not pretty. It didn't come out of nowhere. The tension that boiled over in that bench footage had been simmering for weeks before the cameras caught it publicly, and the moment it cracked the surface publicly was during a press conference that caught everybody off guard. Caitlin Clark sat in front of those microphones, and instead of giving the usual diplomatic non-answers that players are coached to give, she did something different. She smirked, and then she made it crystal clear that she was tired of playing 25 minutes a game. Not frustrated in a subtle read-between-the-lines kind of way, not venting carefully while trying to stay professional. She looked directly at those cameras and laid it out plainly, and the smirk said everything the words didn't. That smirk wasn't amusement, it was exhaustion. It was the expression of someone who has had the same conversation behind closed doors so many times that has stopped feeling worth having, so now she's having it in public instead. To understand why 25 minutes is such a flashpoint, you have to go back to Iowa. During her college career, Caitlin Clark regularly played 35 to 38 minutes per game. Those were the minutes where records fell. Those were the minutes where she became the highest-scoring player in the history of college basketball, men's or women's. Those were the minutes where she hit logo threes in championship games and threw no-look passes that made entire arenas lose their minds. She didn't do those things on rest. She did them because she was trusted with the ball, given the freedom to create, and allowed to get into that rhythm where everything clicks. Rhythm is everything for a player like her. She's not someone who can check in for 12 minutes, drain a few shots, and check back out. She builds momentum, she reads defenses, she gets into a flow state that takes time to reach and disappears the moment you yank her off the floor. Restricting her to 25 minutes isn't managing her, it's diffusing her. And here's what makes the press conference moment so significant beyond just the words she chose. When a player takes their frustration to the media instead of keeping it internal, it means the internal conversations have already failed. That's not a decision made lightly, especially not for someone like Caitlin Clark, who has always been composed, professional, and careful with her public image. Going public with that kind of criticism of your own organization is a last resort. It's what you do when you've exhausted every other option and nobody inside that building is listening. The smirk wasn't defiance, it was resignation, and that's somehow more alarming. The press conference gave us the words, the bench footage gave us the truth. And the truth is uncomfortable to watch if you care about this franchise or this player. There's video circulating now that shows the exact moment Caitlin Clark gets pulled from the game. She walks to the bench, and in those few seconds, you can read everything about the state of this relationship. She doesn't look at Stephanie White, doesn't make eye contact with the assistant coaches who are trying to engage with her. She sits down, crosses her arms, and stares at the floor. Her whole body is closed off, unavailable, done. People have tried to dismiss this. They've called it competitive frustration, said every player gets upset when they get subbed out, claimed it means nothing. But that's not what this is, and anyone who's watched basketball long enough knows the difference. Competitive frustration looks like a player shaking her head, then turning to a teammate, then refocusing. What we see in this footage is something different. This is someone who isn't even trying to hide how she feels anymore. There's no attempt at professionalism in that moment, no mask, just raw, unfiltered disconnection from the coaching staff standing 5 feet away. What makes it especially striking is the context of who Caitlin Clark is and how she's always carried herself. Throughout her entire college career, she was held up as the gold standard of what a coachable, team-first superstar looks like. She pushed her teammates, she celebrated their success, she bought into Lisa Bluder's system completely and never once publicly questioned a decision or showed this kind of body language. Not during losing stretches, not during tough losses, not even in the moments when she had every right to be frustrated. The version of Caitlin Clark that Iowa fans watched for 4 years was someone who kept her emotions in check and trusted the process. That player doesn't ignore her coach walking off the floor. That player doesn't sit alone with her arms crossed, staring at the ground. Whatever has happened between Clark and the Fever coaching staff, it has fundamentally changed how she shows up, and that should alarm everyone connected to this organization. Body language doesn't lie. You can rehearse press conference answers, you can smile for cameras, but in the heat of a game, when you're getting pulled in a moment you feel you should be dominating, your real feelings surface. Hers did, loud and clear.
Now let's talk about the visit, because this is where things get really telling. Lisa Bluder, one of the greatest coaches in the history of women's basketball, recently retired after a legendary career at Iowa. She doesn't owe anyone anything anymore. She has no obligations, no schedules to keep, no recruiting trips to take. She could be doing exactly what most people who've given decades to their profession do when they finally step away, resting. Instead, she boarded a private jet with Jan Jensen, the current Iowa head coach, who served as her longtime assistant, and flew in to watch a regular season Indiana Fever game in person. Let that sink in for a second. This wasn't a playoff game. This wasn't a marquee matchup. This was a regular season game that Lisa Bluder, retired and free, had zero professional reason to attend. And she didn't just watch from home. She flew in. She sat front row. She made sure she was seen. When someone of her stature does something like that, it is never accidental. Retired coaches don't hop on private jets for random regular season games without a reason. That visit was a statement, whether she intended it that way publicly or not. These are the two coaches who built Caitlin Clark from a talented prospect into a generational force. Bluder trusted her in the biggest moments of the biggest games. Jensen was in the film room and on the practice floor shaping her game for years. They know her better than any coaching staff she'll ever play for. They know what she looks like when she's thriving, and they know what she looks like when something is wrong. And apparently what they saw from a distance was concerning enough that they needed to see it up close. That's not a casual check-in. That's mentors watching someone they care deeply about struggling in a situation that doesn't fit her, and showing up to make sure she knows she's not alone in it. The message that presence sends to Clark, to the Fever, and to the entire league is impossible to ignore. We see what's happening. We remember who you are. And what's happening right now is not who you are. That's powerful, and it's damning for an organization that should be the ones making their franchise player feel supported. Here's the core of the problem, and it goes deeper than minutes or shot attempts or any individual game decision. This is a philosophical conflict, and those are the hardest kind to resolve because they're not about tactics, they're about belief systems. Lisa Bluder's entire philosophy at Iowa was built around a simple idea. When you have a player who can change the game, you put the ball in her hands and you trust her to change it. You design your offense around her strengths. You build spacing so she can operate. You let her take the big shots. You trust her in the biggest moments because that trust is what unlocks everything she's capable of. It sounds simple, but it requires a specific kind of coaching confidence to actually execute, because it means accepting that your job is to serve the player's talents rather than the other way around. The results at Iowa were historic. Records that stood for decades fell. Championship game appearances became routine. The most exciting player in women's college basketball emerged from that system precisely because the system was built for her. Stephanie White's approach, based on everything we're seeing this season, appears to operate from the opposite philosophy. Manage the minutes, run the offense through a committee, distribute the ball.
Don't let any single player dominate possession. On paper, that's a legitimate coaching approach. There are teams that win with that philosophy. But here's the problem. That philosophy only works when you don't have a Caitlin Clark on your roster. When you have arguably the most dynamic offensive player in the history of women's basketball, implementing a system designed to limit individual dominance isn't strategy, it's self-sabotage. You don't buy a Ferrari and then drive it in first gear because you want to be fair to the other cars on the road. You drive the Ferrari. You let it do what it was built to do. The clash between these two philosophies is what's creating the visible tension we're watching play out. Clark knows what she's capable of because she's already done it at the highest level under the right circumstances. She's not imagining what could be, she's lived it. She won in that system, she thrived in that system, she broke records in that system, and now she's operating in a system built on completely different principles, and the frustration of knowing what you could be while being prevented from becoming it is the kind of thing that breaks player-coach relationships beyond repair. That's not a problem you solve with a team meeting or a slight adjustment to the rotation. That's a fundamental mismatch that requires one side to completely change their approach. And right now, there's no sign that the side with the power to change things is interested in doing so. People have been comparing Stephanie White to Doc Rivers, but honestly, that might be giving her too much credit. Doc Rivers has a championship ring. He's had genuine success at multiple stops throughout his career. He's earned the benefit of the doubt in a way that White simply hasn't yet. The more accurate comparison is Darvin Ham, and that parallel should make Fever fans deeply uncomfortable. Ham got the Lakers job with enormous expectations. He was supposed to be the coach who could finally maximize LeBron and Anthony Davis together and push that team back into title contention. Instead, what people remember is baffling rotation decisions, a locker room that never fully bought in, and a star player situation that deteriorated publicly over the course of the season. He lasted 1 year and got fired despite making the playoffs. The reason wasn't a lack of effort or preparation. The reason was that he couldn't manage the relationship between his coaching philosophy and his most important player. Sound familiar?
Stephanie White walked into Indiana with massive expectations riding on her shoulders. She was supposed to be the experienced voice that steadied this franchise, the coach who could take what Caitlin Clark started building last season and push it to the next level. After the Fever made the playoffs in Clark's rookie year, there was genuine excitement about what this team could become under competent leadership. Instead, what we've watched unfold is a season defined by mismanagement, public tension, and a superstar who looks more disengaged with every passing week. The previous coach, Christy Sides, at least had the built-in excuse of being in over her head in a situation that grew bigger than anyone anticipated. What's Stephanie White's excuse? She came in as the veteran, the one who'd been around the game long enough to know how to handle this. And what we're seeing suggests she either doesn't know how or doesn't want to. Neither answer is acceptable when you have a franchise player of Clark's caliber sitting on your bench with her arms crossed. The Darvin Ham parallel doesn't end with the bad rotation decisions, it extends to what comes after. When Ham got fired, the Lakers moved quickly to bring in someone whose philosophy actually fit their roster. And the situation stabilized almost immediately because the new staff understood how to work with their stars rather than against them. The Fever are going to face that same crossroads, probably sooner than they'd like to admit. The question is whether they'll make that move proactively before more damage is done, or whether they'll wait until the situation becomes so visibly broken that they have no choice. Based on what we're seeing, it feels like the second option is where this is heading. This part needs to be said plainly, because sometimes the context gets lost in the noise of the current drama. Before Caitlin Clark walked through the doors of the Indiana Fever organization, this franchise was one of the least relevant teams in the WNBA. Not struggling, not rebuilding, irrelevant. Losing seasons had become so routine that they weren't even notable anymore. Empty arenas, no national television presence, no media coverage worth mentioning. The Fever were the kind of team that existed on the periphery of the league, never quite bad enough to be interesting, never quite good enough to matter.
Kelsey Mitchell is a genuinely talented player, but even she couldn't change the trajectory. Season after season of losses with no postseason appearances and no momentum to speak of. The franchise was stuck in a loop with no obvious exit. Then the draft happened. Caitlin Clark put on a Fever jersey and the entire landscape shifted overnight. Sellout crowds became the norm. National television games filled the schedule. Merchandise flew off shelves faster than the league had seen in years. Every game she played generated conversation, debate, highlights, and attention that the WNBA desperately needed. The Fever made the playoffs for the first time in years. Fans who had never thought about women's basketball suddenly had jerseys with her name on the back. People planned travel around Fever road games just to watch her play. The economic and cultural impact she had on that franchise in her first season alone was staggering, and it extended to the entire league. Her presence was lifting the tide for every team, every arena, every broadcaster who carried WNBA games. And the response from the Fever organization to this once-in-a-generation gift? Limit her minutes. Implement a system that minimizes her individual impact. Watch her sit on the bench visibly frustrated while the organization insists everything is fine. It's the kind of institutional dysfunction that's almost hard to believe until you watch it happening in real time. When you are handed a generational talent, your job as an organization is to build everything around maximizing that talent. You hire coaches whose philosophy fits her game. You build your roster around her strengths. You do whatever it takes to make sure she has every possible resource to be the best version of herself. Because when she's the best version of herself, your franchise is thriving. The Fever have seemingly decided to do the opposite, and the consequences are playing out on camera for the entire sports world to see. Let's talk about what happens if Caitlin Clark decides she's done with Indiana, because that possibility is no longer hypothetical. It's a real conversation happening in real time, and the way it would unfold has a poetic kind of justice to it that's hard to ignore. If she leaves, the Fever's immediate public reaction might actually be relief. That sounds insane until you think about it from the perspective of an organization that seems to resent the pressure and scrutiny she brings. They could go back to running their offense exactly the way they want to. No more superstar minutes debates, no more press conference bombs, no more cameras scrutinizing every coaching decision because the biggest name in women's basketball is sitting on their bench looking miserable. For a certain kind of organizational mindset, that sounds like freedom. But then comes the reckoning. Because if Clark lands on another team, and other franchises would absolutely throw max contracts at her and promise to build their entire offense around her strengths, the Fever will have to play against her. And they won't be playing against the restricted 25 minutes a game version they've been mismanaging. They'll be playing against Caitlin Clark fully unleashed. 35 minutes a night, 25 shot attempts if she wants them, a coaching staff whose entire game plan is built around putting the ball in her hands and letting her operate. That is a terrifying prospect for any team in the league, and it would be especially brutal for Indiana, who would know exactly what they gave away and exactly why. There's a pattern in sports of organizations that mismanage generational talent, push them out, and then spend years watching them thrive elsewhere while the franchise decays back into irrelevance. The Fever seem to be reading directly from that playbook, and history suggests they won't like how the story ends.
Think about Kelsey Mitchell again. She's a talented, capable player who spent years on this team going nowhere. No playoffs, no momentum, no national attention. None of that changed until Clark arrived. If Clark leaves, Mitchell goes back to being a solid player on an irrelevant team. The sellout crowds leave with Clark. The national television slots disappear. The media attention evaporates. The Fever return to being exactly what they were before the 2024 draft, a franchise that exists but doesn't matter. Except this time, there's no high draft pick salvation waiting. You don't just find another Caitlin Clark. She's a singular event, not a template. Pushing her out wouldn't just be a mistake, it would be the kind of organizational error that defines a franchise's legacy in the worst possible way. Here's where things stand right now, stripped of any spin or wishful thinking. The body language footage is out there, and it can't be walked back.
The press conference comment is on record. Lisa Bluder sat front row at a regular season game, and nobody in that building thought it was casual. The tension between Clark and the Fever coaching staff is no longer a rumor or speculation. It's visible, documented, and getting discussed on every sports platform in the country. This situation has a trajectory, and the trajectory is not improving. For the fans who bought in fully, the ones who purchased jerseys, bought season tickets, defended Clark against every critic, and tuned in to every single game, this has to feel like a betrayal, not from Clark, but from the organization. They gave you a reason to believe. They handed you the most compelling player in women's basketball and told you this was the beginning of something special, and then they proceeded to systematically undermine the very thing that made it special. Watching that happen in real time, game by game, press conference by press conference, is a particular kind of painful that sports fans understand deeply. You can see the potential, you can see what this could be, and you're watching someone make sure it never gets there. The path forward requires something this organization has shown very little of: honest self-assessment. It would require admitting that the current approach isn't working. It would require being willing to restructure around Clark's strengths rather than asking her to fit into a structure designed for a different kind of team. It would require the kind of coaching change that sends a clear message to her and to the league that Indiana is serious about being the place where she reaches her ceiling. None of that is impossible. All of it would require a level of humility that feels distant given what we've seen so far. Every game where she comes off the bench with her arms crossed is another data point. Every thinly veiled press conference comment is another warning. Every moment of visible distance between her and the coaching staff is the clock ticking louder. There is a breaking point in situations like this, and once it's reached, no amount of organizational messaging or mid-season adjustments pulls it back. The Fever may already be there. That bench footage might be the moment historians look back on and mark as the point of no return. So, here's the real question, and it's worth sitting with. If you're Caitlin Clark, someone who has already proven everything there is to prove, who has broken every record, won every award, and changed the trajectory of an entire sport, how much longer do you accept a situation that's preventing you from being the player you know you are? Do you give it another season and hope things change? Do you force a trade and take your talents somewhere they'll be valued? Do you run out your contract in silence and walk in free agency without looking back? Because one thing is certain, the way things are going, she's leaving eventually. And when she does, the Indiana Fever will return to being what they were before she arrived: invisible, irrelevant, and entirely responsible for the fact that the greatest opportunity in franchise history slipped through their fingers because they couldn't get out of their own way. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is there any version of this that ends well for Indiana, or is the damage already done?